In the era of maritime trade before globalization, for certain products and routes, up to 25% of shipping costs were due to ocean transport, and up to 50% of those costs might be due to loading and unloading at ports. If you imagine a complex piece of technology like the iPhone, with minerals from Africa, critical tech inputs from Europe and China, it would be impossible to put out a product at current consumer grade price points without a dramatic decrease in shipping costs. Marc Levinson's The Box is about the technology of container shipping, which enabled a dramatic decrease in shipping costs, opening the way to an era of globalization. Containerization is a system of shipping goods through intermodal transport, so on trucks and crucially on ships in standard size containers. So when you see trucks on the highway or on major roads, their bodies are containers, and those have standard sizes that can be loaded on trucks, and then those containers can be loaded onto ships in a standardized and operationalized way. So globalization means a lot of things, but in this context, it means the disintegration of manufacturing and production into a worldwide system where different localities specialize in producing things that accord to their comparative advantage. And that might be their manufacturing capability combined with cheap labor costs, and combining that with cheap shipping to make this uh, disintegration of manufacturing possible. Otherwise, without containerization, shipping costs might eat up to 25% of the total cost of goods, like we were saying at the beginning of the video. And that makes this process of breaking up a complex product into multiple components and shipping all the components to different locations for development and assembly. Because you'd have to add shipping costs at each stage of that process, it makes the process of this disintegration economically possible. Um, so what's crucial about containerization is that the entire system of shipping had to be standardized around a new way of doing things, which is shipping things from point to point. So, for example, directly from a factory to the next factory, um, as opposed to the previous way of doing things, which was to break things into individual pieces of cargo and do extensive loading and unloading at ports in partial loads. So, for example, where on a ship you might have tires together with bags of rice, together with ceramics in mixed cargo, and at ports you'd have people manually loading and unloading these cargo ships and putting them onto other ships, which was a very labor-intensive process that increased the cost of shipping by a sizable amount. So when the that labor intensive process was cut out, ships were able to be transported in more efficient ways. So some of the key things standing in the way of developing this process were labor's unwillingness to cooperate with this product process of standardization, which is completely reasonable because their jobs and livelihoods depended on it. Systematic readiness, meaning that ports needed to be developed to accommodate this new technology. They had to build cranes, uh, facilities that could handle these larger ships, and a bunch of other technological requirements. And also the massive size of capital needed to finance these ports and these large ships that were able to handle these large containers. So the book details the process of how this came to be in the 1950s through 1980s is the main source of the action. And it especially centers around the story of Malcolm McLean, a key entrepreneur who ran the Sea Land Corporation, and he drove many of the transitions of this process, including the crucial insight that you could take a truck body and load it onto a ship, and lower the cost of transport that way. So I wanted to share two core insights that I got from this book. The first insight is that, first of all, technology requires reshaping around it to fully take advantage of it. So shipping things in containers had a lot of benefits, but the entire organizational structure around shipping that was previously embedded in society had to change to organize around this new method of containerization. So first of all, labor had to reorganize around the process of packing and unpacking ships in mixed cargo to this process where ships were packed. entire containers were packed at the point of manufacturing and unpacked at the destination, which eliminated the labor expense at ports. So manufacturers had to start thinking about shipping these entire containers of cargo and also the labor that was involved in unloading, loading and unloading, grew to be gradually eliminated throughout the second half of the 20th century. A second uh, uh, point that illustrates this idea of technology needing to reshape society is that there was extensive standardization that needed to be done to get containerization to work properly. So at the outset of containerization in the 50s, ships were all using different size containers, and they first had to agree on standardized sizes that everybody would use across the system for systems to be able to be built that could operate in the same way. So if you're running a port and there are people that come in with 10 different size containers from different ship lines, you're not going to be able to build a standardized infrastructure that can process every single one of those boxes that come in from all the ships. So a key part was agreeing on standard sizes and technologies to operate the containers with that allowed this whole process to be built out from end so that ships can be so the containers can be brought in from all these different manufacturers, different trucking lines, different shipping lines, different ports, and be sent around the world um, and still be handled in the same way. So containerization is as much a story of standardization and protocols as it is of the raw technological development of the technologies used to handle the containers. Lastly, port structures themselves had to change. So rather than allowing many small ports that handled mixed cargo, like in the previous pre-container stages, the incentives of containers led to megaports, and I'll get to this more in the next point. So this led to the growth and decline of entire cities based on whether they were able to take advantage of containerization or not. So this leads to the second insight that I want to share from this book, which is the structure of opportunity spaces. So containerization presented an opportunity for port cities. There were huge capital costs in setting up ports that could handle container traffic. They had to be able to handle large ships. There were these large cranes that needed to be built to load and unload containers onto ships. There needed to be space for container storage. There also need to be a bunch of technologies for intermodal transport, so getting containers back and forth between ships and trucks and land transport. So containerization had the following characteristics that made the development of mega ports possible and necessary. First of all, it was extremely capital intensive. It cost millions of dollars to finance this whole suite of changes that needed to be done to make a port able to handle containers at a large scale. Second, there were economies of scale, so bigger ports allowed you to distribute fixed costs across a larger total volume of containers, and that reduced unit costs of shipping each container. So the bigger a port is, the more efficient it is, and yeah, the more it's able to handle, the better its cost structure gets to be, and that allows for growth. And lastly, there are network effects. So once a port becomes a central node in the world shipping system, it becomes easier to route more and more trade through it. So this is a similar principle to why certain airports become air travel nodes like Chicago. Um, Becoming a large port means that you get more importance in the world shipping system, and that leads to even more traffic through it. It's kind of a winner-take-all system of ports. So perhaps the biggest relative winner in this process was Singapore. They went from being a tiny island nation in Southeast Asia, and though they did possess a geographic advantage at the start of it, being located at a key point on the Strait of Malacca, they had to capitalize on that intensively by building out this port infrastructure that allowed them to handle massive amounts of container traffic. And they eventually rose to rival Hong Kong in container volume, eventually becoming the top container port in the world on the 2000s until finally losing out to Shanghai, uh, which is now the top container port. So there were losers of this process as well, and such prominent ports as San Francisco and Boston in the U.S. lost out to Los Angeles, which became the U.S.'s largest container port. So that doesn't mean things are over for San Francisco and Boston. They're obviously doing quite well in other directions, but they had to pivot to add value in other ways besides their port. So this illustrates to me something about the need to harness key advantages and capitalize on them during platform shifts. So every platform shift offers the opportunity to take advantage of it, to gain position with the platform shift. And if you fail to take advantage of it in the right way, you have to eventually pivot into some other way of adding value. So those are the key insights I got from this book. I think it's a little bit limited in certain ways as well. So one of the things is that the book does a good job of explaining globalization. So it was written in the first editions in 2006, and I think the second edition, which I read, was updated in the 2010s, but I'd have to double check that. But the key point is that it doesn't explain the post-globalization process, and that's the current era that we're in. Just as I'm recording this, Trump just slapped 15% global tariffs in defiance of the Supreme Court. So the old story that shipping costs enable greater and greater globalization is actually a story that is now over, and we're in this post-globalization period where supply chains are being rerouted, and different dynamics are happening. So there's cultural reaction, there's wage equalization between higher wage and lower wage countries, there's new robotics and automation. So the unidirectional narrative of greater containerization, greater global trade is no longer true. This was kind of written right at the end of that process. That said, the book still provides the base for what is the current state of things, and globalization is not over. The US-China trade relationship is still strong, still complex, and these new complex rediverted supply chains still rely on containerization to work. So it's not as if it's no longer relevant. This kind of provides the base layer backstory, and we'll need more studies that tell us more about the post-globalizing period that'll be built on this container logic. So the second kind of limitation of this book is that there are a couple of dull stretches. There's long sections on labor disputes where it's kind of a back and forth between these disputants. Some dull sections on standardization, which is it's a little bit dry in these sections, talking about the bureaucratic issues of getting everybody to agree on standards. So that said, large stretches of the book are still quite engaging with the story of strategy, entrepreneurship, economics happening that are quite engaging, and those are related to the insights that I was sharing earlier. But just if you're going to read the book, be wary of some of these duller stretches. I think this was my second or third time trying to read the book, and I finally finished it this time because I was able to power through some of those duller parts. But on the whole, I think it's still worth it. So who should read this book? I'd say people thinking about how technology is assimilated into social and economic systems. Because like I was saying, one of the key insights of the book is that technology is not just about technology, it's about how the world needs to change to be able to accommodate technology. So if you're thinking about that issue, I'd recommend this. Also, people that are interested in globalization. This tells kind of the technology side of globalization as opposed to the cultural and political side of technology globalization. But that's still really important, obviously, in the overall phenomenon. Lastly, people who like entrepreneurial storytelling, if you like books like Shoe Dog or The Everything Store, this is a great entrepreneurship story because it follows Malcolm McLean. That's kind of the spine of the book, though there's a lot of other characters and developments. It is an engaging story of Malcolm McLean's story, rise from a trucking empire to a container shipping empire to multiple acquisitions, mergers, bankruptcy. Though I won't. Yeah. So yeah, it's definitely an engaging story of entrepreneurship. So another reason to read this book is it's a great way to think about the way technology shapes society and how it gets assimilated. And what that makes me think of is AI capabilities now. Um, so we're going to see the same process play out with AI, where AI does certain things well and it does certain things less well. And we're actually going to need to make full use of AI. We're going to need to structure our inputs so that what we feed into AI allows it to operate at its manual maximum effectiveness for it to be an effective um, tool for us. So if you notice that certain prompts do well, for example, if you're working with Claude or ChatGPT, it works well if you feed it certain kinds of inputs or are very clear about your inputs. That helps you see that when you give the AI certain kinds of things, it performs better than if you are more vague or more open-ended. So we're going to need to structure workflows like that the whole way through. Going to need to pipe into AI the things that it needs to do its job best. So we also saw, for example, the MCP protocol for agents communicating with servers. It's another case of standardization. We're seeing APIs built out for major models and probably lots of infrastructure to be built out for agents. So this is a book is a great way to prime your brain for how thinking about organizational, social, societal standardization changes uh, are all needed to make the way for new technologies to diffuse maximally and confer their maximum benefits. So if that sounds interesting to you, I'd recommend checking out the book. But yeah, thanks for listening, and I'll be back with more book reviews if that kind of content interests you.